What's going on, Crispy Gang? Back at it again, and today I'll tell you everything you need to know about the trauma team that can save your life with the right amount of eddies. Trauma Team International is a corporation that specializes in rapid response medical services. As a premium paramedical franchise, Trauma Team is one of the most powerful corporations in the 21st century. As far back as 2020, trauma teams have boasted over a dozen on-call teams at any time in any major city. Made up of the best paramedical techs and staff available, the teams consisted of a Eurodyne pilot, 2 security officers, a senior med tech, and an assistant, all traveling within a heavily armored AV4 supported by mobilized tanker trucks and ground refueling stations. The AV4 itself carries the most sophisticated reviving and life support technology available to any corporation. The pilot mans the AV4 while the co-pilot mans the vehicle's front-mounted Gatling gun. The pilot and co-pilot do not leave the Eurodyne during patient extraction, and their cockpit is kept separate from the rest of the vehicle. Patient extraction, the 2 EMTs and 2 security specialists drop in from the AV4 and make their way to the patient. If necessary, the 2 security specialists will clear a path to the patient for the EMTs, busting their rifles and machine guns. Each EMT is armed with a pistol for self-protection. Summoned by dialing 911 on any phone, trauma team automatically will bill the caller from the moment the call is made until delivered to the hospital. Deadman transmitters also exist, such as the credit cards known as trauma team cards, able to be bent in half and sending off a signal within a 20-mile radius, allowing trauma team response within a moment the victim collapses. Once the patient is loaded onto the AV4, they are hooked up to life support and bio monitors, as well as cryogenically stabilized. Surgery is performed at the most crucial wounds, while a specialist uses various methods to heal the patient, as the pilot takes the AV4 to the nearest emergency room. This process takes approximately 4 minutes. While responsible for reviving and stabilizing any critically wounded patients, trauma teams are under no obligation to transport casualties to a hospital. With a rate of €100 per minute, most trauma team services are part of corporate group insurance policies or individual trauma team international accounts with monthly premiums. Trauma Team offers different coverage plans. Need full body life coverage? This plan costs either $500 per month or over $5,000 with a yearly plan discount. In the event that Trauma Team is dispatched, the customer also has to pay €100 for every minute until arrival at the nearest corporate hospital. Finally, the patient also has to pay for the cost of all ammunition that the trauma team fired, all the fuel that was used up, and has to pay for any equipment or personal damage. If the trauma team is unable to reach the customer in 10 minutes, the patient receives 50% off on any ammunition spent. Next up, we got the corporate coverage or the corporate executive coverage. The corporate coverage plan costs $1,500 per month or over $16,000 with a yearly plan discount. The corporate executive coverage plan costs 1,200 eddies per month or over $120,000 with a yearly discount. These plans promise a response time of 7 minutes. The patient is taken to a corporate medical center upon pickup. The policyholder still has to pay for equipment or personal damage. The executive plan covers all ammo and fuel costs, but the corporal still has to pay for any equipment or personal damage. The highest policy is the priority coverage. This plan costs 34,000 eddies per month and does not have a yearly rate. This plan comes with a golden trauma team card. The response time for the plan is 3 to 5 minutes, with trauma team claims to be the fastest in the business. Once the patient is picked up, they will be taken to a corporal hospital instead of a medical center. All ammunition, fuel costs are covered, but the patient or policyholder still has to pay for any equipment or personnel damage. With the extremely high crime rate in the United States, murder and homicide are endemic in the city. It's safe to say that you're gonna need some type of suffrage that can literally save your life. Next up, we have a recent interview between Multiversity Comics featuring Cullen Bunn and illustrator Miguel Valderrama for an upcoming Trauma Team comic being released on September 9th. Thanks to Multiversity, the comic interview went as follows. How would you both explain the general concept of the series without spoiling anything? Elevator pitch or more if you prefer. Cullen Bunn. Trauma Team is a squad of elite medical and rescue technicians, expertly equipped and heavily armed. Their clients pay for extraction and treatment when they get themselves into hot water. Nadia is a team member of Trauma Team, but she has experienced a great deal of pain and suffering herself. In her last mission, she managed to save a patient, but the rest of her team ended up getting slaughtered. She's now been cleared for active duty again, but the memories of the day still haunt her, and she needs her head in the game. The patient they are going to rescue is pinned down by a ferocious gang of killers trapped in a towering skyscraper turned death trap. As a role-playing franchise, Cyberpunk has been around since 1988, with the latest edition being released in 2005. Even beyond that, the counterculture cyberpunk genre has existed for even longer, with such media as the writings of Philip K. Dick and later William Gibson to Akira, Blade Runner, and Judge Dredd, just to name a few. How did the ideas of cyberpunk from the game to the eponymous genre influence your take on Trauma Team? CB. I was playing the cyberpunk role-playing game back in the day, and I was reading Philip K. Dick and William Gibson long before that. My personal take on a cyberpunk dystopia has been taking shape for decades, drawing from bits and pieces of my favorite interpretations. There has been a nightmare city in my head for a long time, and while it's not exactly a nice city of Cyberpunk 2077, I think they're cousins. MV. Some of those books and movies are my favorite work of all time, so I can't deny the influence, but for this comic, I got more influence from heist or police stories than the genre itself. The cyberpunk part is more in the details and social critique. Conversely, how did you see Cyberpunk 2077 Trauma Team as a part of the cyberpunk itself? From how it may interact with players from upcoming video games to how it may shed a light on other aspects for a very futuristic world coming to the genre. To me, Trauma Team encapsulates the idea that life is cheap in Night City. Only those who can afford to get the assistance of Trauma Team. Everyone else can kick bricks. Talk about a grim reality. The world's so violent that a megacorporation has risen with the sole purpose of providing emergency medical assistance and evac when you get gunned down in the street. And there's another business that they are flourishing. MB. I think that this kind of little stories elevate the world of the game. It makes you think that something's happening everywhere at any moment. And seeing the team, how they struggle with the system as everyone else, makes the dystopia even more believable. Trauma Team International is a fixture in the world of Cyberpunk 2077, as people keeping a close eye on the game's development have submersed, not to mention people who know the franchise lore. When does the story take place with regards to the rest? Did you have to set a time period in mind relative to anything to happen in the upcoming game, or did you just tell a story that fits somewhere else in the same world? CB. In my mind, the story takes place during the same timeline as the game. It's just another story playing out somewhere in the shadows. It has a kind of evergreen quality as it is not bound to any events of the game. It's a story that the readers can enjoy whether or not they play the game, really. We just want to show off that there is more going on in Night City than you realize. If we do more stories, they might focus on different characters and different aspects of the Cyberpunk 2077 mythology. For Cullen Bunn. You have dealt with dark subjects before, from Sinestro and Magneto to Harrow County and Manor Black. Which of the stories do you feel would be the most similar to Trauma Team for a general tone to any recurring themes or anything else you can think of? CB. That's an interesting question. I don't usually think about shared tones. I just try to find a mood that fits the tale and go from there. There is a dark, gritty story, and although it takes place against the background of a massive world, it is pretty grounded. In a lot of ways, the first few issues of Magneto might be similar, focusing on a smaller, very dark event that is taking place in a much bigger world. It's a deliberate story with a very wounded character taking center stage. There's a lot of intense action coming at the reader, but the character's trauma, pardon the pun, allows to see the multi sides of the conflict, and although this is a sci-fi story through and through, I use some of my horror muscles too. The stuff Trauma Team encounters is harrowing to say the least. For Miguel Valderrama. Seeing the different setting of the series, did you change anything about how you dealt with illustrations in comparison to other projects, particularly Hunters and Giants? Yeah, I always try something different with every new project. Hunters and Giants are very different in the line work and coloring, but both have a very cartoony approach, more juvenile. With Cyberpunk, I wanted to be a bit more grounded and dirty, as the story is really crude and violent. It's the first time I'm not coloring myself, so I try my best with the inking and working a bit more with shadows and textures. Considering the very unusual position Trauma Team International has in comparison to other medical operatives in fiction, being essentially a medical private military corporation with no qualms about killing to get to their client. This series is definitely not the standard fare for those expecting more medics from other franchises. In a world as cynical as this, are there any particular things you two are especially excited about exploring in Trauma Team, from the concepts to mega corporations or anything else? CB. Our lead character, Nadia, offers an interesting dichotomy. She is not necessarily a cynical person by Night City standards. She actually wants to help people. She wants to treat the sick and injured, but that isn't her job. Her job is to treat those who have paid for Trauma Team services. What happens if she is treating a client and sees an injured child nearby? She might want to do one thing, but the job and her teammates might have other goals. What happens if she is assigned to rescue and treat someone who doesn't deserve to be rescued? I think a lot of people will be able to understand being caught between what's right and what your job requires of you. The story sums up almost every aspect of a medical system, but living in the times we're living, what would they do in a pandemic? It couldn't be more cyberpunk. Is there anything else you both would like the readers and or fans to know about the series? CB. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, the black iceberg, in terms of what we could do in this world. It's one story in one of the shadowy, out of the way corners of Night City. The potential for more stories, more characters, more action, more strife, more horror is unlimited, really. MV. It wasn't planned to be made during a pandemic, but the story is pretty relevant to these days. And if you see the Trauma Team in game, be humble. They really go through some serious stuff to get you out safely. And that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please elbow drop that like button. It really helps my boy. I'll go find his rhythm. Obliterate that sub button. Comment and subscribe to Crispy TV. Crispy tuning out.